Footage has emerged showing Gazans, including children, being burnt alive after an attack on the Al Qaza hospital by Israel. Israeli fighter jets bombed a hospital in central Gaza overnight, killing at least 4 people in a fire which ravaged a tented area sheltering displaced Palestinians. Footage showed at least one person moving among the flames as bystanders and rescue workers screamed desperately and attempted to put out the blaze with hose pipes and buckets of water. Children were shown among the wounded, and a man sobbed as he carried a toddler with a bandaged head in his arms. At least 4 people died in the strike on the Al Qaza Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah, with the death toll expected to rise, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The Israeli Defense Forces said it had conducted a precise strike on a Hamas command and control center embedded within a compound that previously served as the Al Qaza Hospital. The compound was used by Hamas terrorists to plan and execute terrorist attacks against IDF troops and the State of Israel, the military said. It insisted that it had taken numerous steps to mitigate the risk of harming civilians, including the use of precise munitions and aerial surveillance and additional intelligence. Of course, Israel there shamelessly acting as if this is a Hamas territory again, and they engaged in precision strikes, which clearly they did not do. Now, we have a clip of this footage, but extreme warning. This is distressing. Please look away and mute if you do not wish to watch. There is a 5-second countdown to make sure that you don't accidentally watch it.
اقسم بالله الراجل والمرأة والبنت الصغيرة بنحرقوا قدامي والله العظيم اقسم بالله.
Now, why did we play this clip? Because I think we should. This has been happening for years, specifically ramped up since October 7th, 2023. This is the reality for Palestinians. Now, Keir Starmer has yet to say anything. There has been complete silence from our government. Now, notice how the media reports on this story. Some of it is more subtle than others, but you can see the double standard. Now, The Independent, well, they said this. Israeli soldiers killed in Hezbollah attack as airstrike kills women and children at food center in Gaza. So when the IDF are killed, we have the victim and the perpetrator. Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah. Within that same headline, we have women and children being killed by an airstrike, when it should say Israel killed them. Now, NBC, they said this. Fire breaks out at Gaza hospital after Israeli strike. Now, we have the perpetrator named. It was an Israeli strike, but it's framed as a fire breaks out. Hezbollah drone attacks kills 4 Israeli soldiers, while striking Gaza leaves 20 dead. So Hezbollah and the IDF are names, but within the same headline, we have 20 dead from strike. Helena, this is one of the most harrowing things to date. I want to get your thoughts on all of this, specifically how we're yet to hear from the Prime Minister, given that it didn't take him very long to condemn Iran.
I mean, we literally had a statement today from David Lammy say, well, we're imposing these sanctions on Iran after their attack on Israel. I'm like, well, they attacked a military target after being given casus belli by Israel. Okay, so if you want to put sanctions on somebody, say, for example, you want to do it because they are funding other groups in the Middle East or whatever, yeah, why are we not putting sanctions on people who just bomb hospitals? Like, remember, cast your minds back to November of last year during the Al Ahli bombing attack in that was in the northern Gaza Strip, and there was a little bit unsure as to whether or not it was an Israeli airstrike or whether or not that there was a misfiring rocket or whatever it was. And people said online they thought that it was an Israeli airstrike or an airburst munition. It's still unsure as to what the attack even was. But the outrage, the absolute incredulity that people came to you with when you had claimed, well, there's a potential here that Israel has airstrike the hospital. They said, "Oh, they would never attack a hospital.
Mm.
How dare you insinuate it? The IDF is the most moral army in the world." And then what's happened over a year later? Here we are. There are zero functioning hospitals left in Gaza, to the point to which even the IDF, when describing the area around the Al Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, that was the one you saw in that quite harrowing footage. They even said a compound that used to be used as, or used to be part of the Al Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Gaza. So there's not even a hospital left, because again, literally no hospitals in Gaza are now functional. They paved over multiple hospitals to be able to create the Netzarim corridor. It is, as has been described by independent observers, been a systematic effort to try and eliminate the healthcare facilities in Gaza. And when is this ever discussed by our politicians? When is it ever discussed by members of our government? It isn't. And when they get asked about this in Parliament, the response is always, well, we will investigate, we'll let these Israel investigate for us, right? We'll let them mark their own homework. But of course, she has a right to defend herself because some reason Israel uses she, her pronouns in Keir Starmer's world. And can they ever, I mean, they had like a mealy mouthed statement about the attacks on the peacekeepers in Lebanon, which was just, well, if there has been an attack, then we condemn it, rather than, explicitly calling out what is a ridiculous attack by the IDF on UN peacekeeper positions in Lebanon, the UNIFIL specifically in that area. Even when they can muster up a tiny criticism of Israel, it's always couched in the idea that they should be like they should be investigated rather than calling out
Mm.
the war crimes for what they are, especially when you compare it to the way in which they discuss Russia Ukraine, which I'm sure is a comparison that we have made a lot. We've made a lot how when they want to condemn Putin as a war criminal, instantly they'll happily do it. There was footage of Keir Starmer saying it on Sophie Ridge deliberately. Yes, I believe Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. Oh, about Netanyahu, the man who the ICC chief prosecutor has requested an arrest warrant for war crimes. You're going to call Netanyahu a war criminal? No, 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 no. I wouldn't want to make any judgments at the moment. I can't say anything like that because again, it's one rule for them and another rule for everybody else.
Yeah, and there's always this plausible deniability. So even if they do bring themselves to condemn, they'll say, well, if it's true, then yes, of course we condemn it. Or yes, we need to investigate what happens. And often it's Israel investigating themselves. But anyone else, Russia, Putin, anyone who's not our ally, straight away, we are quick to condemn, even if we don't even have the full facts there. Because it doesn't matter. International law doesn't matter, even to a human rights lawyer, former human rights lawyer. Um, innocent civilians being killed, that doesn't matter. What matters is serving our allies and being strong on our enemies, essentially. Now, I want to talk about the newspapers and the headlines. It's so evident that when reporting on Gaza, right, it's not an accident the way it's framed, right? When Palestinians are the victims from an Israeli attack, we get the passive voice. We don't really know where they were killed. Oh, a fire erupts after Israeli strike. Or people died. Do you not think it's deliberate then? Because you cannot make that mistake this many times, which tells me, people in the media specifically push this editorial line. Like writers are being told, you have to be more sympathetic to Israel. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. There was plenty of whistleblowers who've talked about, say, for example, at CNN, at the New York Times, about the language that they are and aren't allowed to use. For example, the things like occupation weren't being allowed to
Mm.
use. I believe that was at the New York Times or on the CNN, one of the two, if I remember correctly. The language that they use, there were certain words that you can't even say, despite the fact that, like, the state of the Palestinian territories as being occupied by Israel has been a precedent in international law for half a century. So the idea this be something that we can't say when we're discussing a conflict, which is directly a result of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, is quite frankly ridiculous and just shows you how entirely biased our media organizations are. And you'll rightly call out the active versus passive voice, as if what the IDF have been doing in Gaza and Lebanon is something that they've been forced to do. They've had their hand forced. They have no other choice but to commit the war crimes that done, and therefore there are just externalities that happen because of them, rather than war crimes that have been clearly committed. It's always very passive, for example, Palestinians resisting occupation, that is being described as something that they have actively done to Israel, despite the fact that that is a response, a retaliation to the illegal occupation of the territories that they inhabit. It's as simple as that. Regardless of whether or not that you think what Palestinians have done in terms of resistance is justified or not, they have committed war crimes, and that's why there is an arrest warrant or a request for arrest warrant for many Hamas leaders as well, for example. That doesn't change the fact. None of that changes the fact that those who are under a belligerent occupation have every right to resist that by military means against military targets. And so it's ridiculous when you try and say that it's terrible that Iran have attacked Israel when they attacked military targets. And this isn't me saying, this is the American
Mm.
State Department saying that Iran have attacked military targets. Yet again, it's one rule for them and one rule for everybody else. And that is exactly covered up in the way in which they talk about the language that they use to describe how these events have panned out throughout the conflict. Again, not just since October the 7th, but essentially throughout the entirety of the occupation from 1967 until today. And this will continue for as long as Israel is our geopolitical ally, and our politicians care far more about their mate than they do about international law, than they care about the Rome Statute, than they care broadly about maintaining international cooperation and peace. Because the biggest thing that can bring down peace in this world is the idea, in fact, that some rules can apply to somebody other and not apply to other people. I mean, what can you say? What can you say if you're somebody who is a complete neutral party in this when the kind of crimes that Russia commits in Ukraine is being committed by Israel in Gaza, but only one side gets called out? And one side it's okay and one side it's not. Well, that means the justification for everybody committing those is there because it's not about an actual rule being applied to everybody. It's just about trying to police the behavior of other people that you don't like. And that is the worst way of trying to bring about global cooperation and peace.
Yeah, and initially when Iran struck Israel, a lot of the narrative was they were specifically targeting civilians, which actually no one was killed apart from one Palestinian who was accidentally killed. But they were targeting military bases and their operations, whereas Israel have been just indiscriminately bombing people. That's just what they do. Now, for me, Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, and every single leader who was still supporting Israel, still sending weapons and aid, those burning children are on them. And frankly, I think they have blood on their hands. Because you cannot look at this. I mean, we just witnessed the footage tonight, right? And these people in power will have more evidence than we have probably, and yet they seem to look away and continue to fund this. So I want to say that anyone who's still supporting Israel, any governments that want to support them financially or with weapons, and that includes Keir Starmer, you have blood on your hands.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.